Well, today is a day off for the Edmonton Oilers, which gives us a good opportunity to talk about where we could see this team go. Now, to help us out, I wanted to go over to the Oilers Now with Bob Stouffer show on Shed 880 from a few days ago. This is from October 29th. The show was posted onto Twitter, and you can kind of see what the tale of the tape was for this broadcast. They had the Bakersfield Condors head coach, they had themselves Brian Lawton, they also had Rob Brown, and their 4:35 time slot was taken by none other than one Elliotte Friedman. And on this segment, with Oilers Now with Bob Stouffer, Friedman went out there and talked about some of the names that the Oilers could go out there and look for. Okay, great. Let's dive over into an article published on hockeylatest.com that goes over these names and describes them in detail. Daniel Lucent went out there and wrote this, so good on him. NHL insider Friedman links the Oilers to several superstar defensemen. Okay, superstar defensemen. Let's try to evaluate that as to whether or not that's true. So, starting things out, the article goes out there and talks about the show. It talks about how Bob Stouffer had the program and Friedman was on it. They're certainly looking at trade routes to improve their roster, according to Elliotte Friedman, and they are in search of more dependable defenders. During his appearance on Oilers Now, host Bob Stouffer asked Friedman to name some of the defensemen that might actually be available to help the Oilers this season. Friedman named a few interesting ones to start with Anaheim Ducks veteran Cam Fowler. With almost 1,000 games and an average of over 23 minutes of ice time per game, Fowler would indeed bring stability and experience to the Oilers' blue line. Word is, Fowler and the Ducks have discussed his future, which leaves the door open Silk Sonic style for a potential trade. Now, Cam Fowler is a name we have talked about before. There were conversations linking him to like Utah and Detroit and stuff, and we did make a few videos about that, but I didn't want to focus on Fowler in this commentary, particularly because I'm biased. I had Fowler on my fantasy team earlier this year, and he wasn't doing anything, so I dropped him, and now he's just kind of there in the free agency pool. But all tangents to my fantasy league aside, I did want to talk about some of the other guys that were listed here. Of course, that said, the Chicago Blackhawks might offer some viable defensive options to the Oilers as well. One such name that has been discussed is Connor Murphy, but a couple of more surprising ones are out there too. With the addition of both Alec Martinez and TJ Brodie this offseason, the Blackhawks now have a ton of depth on the blue line and might be more apt to move Murphy. According to Friedman, the Blackhawks might be willing to deal one of their defensemen, a move that would provide the Oilers with a very capable asset without depleting their roster or moving one of their forwards. Now, that's interesting. Chicago, right? They added Martinez, they added Brodie. Decent decor, kind of old. Actually, no. Like, averaged out, it's kind of middle tier because they've got a bunch of old guys and a bunch of young guys too. But it is intriguing to me that Chicago was able to load up in that way because now they have some extra options for trades, including this final surprise name that Friedman ended up listing. Seth Jones of the Chicago Blackhawks. Very talented, has loads of experience, and has a $9.5 million contract with a no-movement clause. If Edmonton were serious about adding Jones, it would likely take some maneuvering, perhaps with the help of a third team retaining a portion of his salary. If it comes to structuring around salary retention in a deal, there is little doubt that the addition of Jones would bolster the Oilers' defensive lineup. The quote from Friedman said this, another one is Seth Jones, but I don't know how on earth they could make that work. So, let's dive into this idea of Chicago Blackhawks defender Seth Jones being an Edmonton Oilers trade target. Firstly, I wanted to ask the question, do you think it's really possible? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Jones is 30 years old, 6'4", 214, right-handed guy, and making $9.5 million a year till the end of 2029-2030. He has been one of the only guys, I would say, that has challenged Darnell Nurse for one of the worst contracts reputation-wise in the National Hockey League. It's kind of bad, the discussion that goes on about these guys, because they're paid so much, yet their effectiveness on the ice is so reduced. Not to say that he doesn't produce points. Like, Seth Jones is on pace for 52 points this season in 82 games. He had 31 points in 67 games last year, and 51 points in 78 games in his first Chicago Blackhawks season. production isn't necessarily the issue here with Seth Jones, who currently has 7 points in 11 games now in this season. The problem is he's not really the best defensively, and his offense isn't like number one defenseman in the league territory. Like, sure, getting 50 points is nice, getting 40 points is nice, being on pace for 50 points is nice, but Seth Jones is making more than Cale Makar. He's making more than Quinn Hughes. Same thing you could say about Darnell Nurse. These guys are overpaid because they are big, and that size doesn't necessarily equate to meaningful dollar amount values compared to what other defensemen get. If Seth Jones was making $5 or $6 million a year, he'd actually be seen as a pretty reasonable guy to add on to any team. And that's totally disregarding the salary retention and whatever dollar amount is attached there. Reputation-wise, these guys would be seen as better. Because, oh yeah, they're not paid as much as a guy like Hughes or a guy like Makar, so they don't need to be as good. But Nurse and Jones both get paid more, so that's sort of where that argument becomes apparent. Anyways, if you wanted to add on Seth Jones to this Oilers team, he would immediately be a huge top 4 addition to that squad. Thinking about Evan Bouchard, Matthias Ekholm, Darnell Nurse, Seth Jones, that would be a solid defense core. And maybe the second pairing would not be as good defensively as you might want it to be, but both of these guys, Jones and Nurse, can move, they can skate, they can lay down the boom if they wanted to. They can both hit, and they can both man a power play to some capacity. Of course, it's difficult to do that when Evan Bouchard is supposed to be the number 1 guy, but lately they did try experimenting moving him away from the first unit, so maybe there's a different opportunity here. But Friedman is right as well. It would be very difficult for the Oilers to make this sort of a trade work. Now, for Seth Jones, he would have to say yes. He would have to approve any sort of a trade because he does have no movement protection. Whether or not he would be okay with going to Edmonton is pretty obvious, in my opinion. Like, oh, hey, Seth Jones, you're on one of the worst teams in the NHL. Chicago sucks, which might not actually be the best day to say that, considering they beat the Kings earlier today, but either way, Chicago's not the best team. Do you want to go over to the Stanley Cup finalists in the Edmonton Oilers? Do you want to play with McDavid? Do you want to be sending passes up to Draisaitl? Do you want to be paired with Darnell Nurse? You guys can be the most expensive, not as good second pairing in the league. Okay, maybe not that last part. But I think for Seth Jones, there'd be a very reasonable argument to say that he would be interested in this kind of an opportunity and that he would be accepting. So for Edmonton, I think if you wanted to get this kind of a deal done, you would need to do that double salary retention with another team. $9.5 million is a lot, and even cut that in half, $4.75 million is still pretty beefy. Maybe it's a lot more appropriate for a guy like Seth Jones, but for the purposes of building a roster for the Stanley Cup playoffs, maybe the double retention would be the best course of action here. Retain 50, send it over to like Columbus or something, so he's $4.75 million, and then retain him at 50% again to get that 4.75 down to a 2.325 or 375, 2.375, that's what it is. That's a really good cap hit. Like, I don't care how Seth Jones' defensive play is bad. If he's only making 2-point-something million and he can be physical, he can produce as much as he can, I think that's a really good addition for the Edmonton Oilers. It'd maybe be their best one if you wanted to go down the options here. I mean, think about it. Would you rather have Connor Murphy, or would you rather have, Cam Fowler, or would you rather have Seth Jones? Maybe Cam Fowler has a little bit of potential too as a minutes-eating, defensive-minded guy, but do you really need somebody to get added on to the Oilers and play 23 minutes a night? Not necessarily. So I'm kind of thinking, go with the bigger guy. Not literally, like, okay, literally, he is bigger, but like, go with the guy that provides bigger offense and maybe lesser defense, because you don't need to prioritize the defense when you make a trade for somebody who's technically going to be the 4th defenseman on the team. Cam Fowler is great, but he's really great in Anaheim because he plays so much and he's defensively minded. But for Edmonton, getting on a guy like Nurse and Jones together, that seems like a pretty dynamic pairing. I honestly would be interested in seeing that. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Elliotte Friedman and this commentary that he made on Bob Stouffer's Oiler Now show. Do you think Seth Jones could be a viable trade option for the Edmonton Oilers? This actually isn't the first time we had talked about this, believe it or not. So obviously there's an idea floating around here that makes sense. We just gotta go out there and try to find it. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Seth Jones being a potential Edmonton Oilers trade target. Do you think this works? Do you think it doesn't? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. 9. and bye.